So in Ross chapter 7, 7.2, this is on page 72, the focus here is on the matter of sentences. And there's really not a whole lot to say about this, except that in Hebrew, sentences can be either verbal or verbless. Okay, and I just want to make a distinction between those. Verbal sentences are sentences that actually have a verb in them, an explicit verb. And you've been learning some verbs in your most recent chapters. Yashav, he sat. Halach, he walked. Okay, those are explicit verbs. So a verbal sentence is a sentence with an explicit verb. There are also what are called verbless sentences or verbless clauses. Okay, so just understand, I am using clause and sentence sometimes interchangeably, but if you want to know what the difference is when I draw a distinction between the two, a sentence can consist of several clauses. A clause will always have some kind of a verb, whether the verb is explicit or implied, but there's some assertion going on in a clause, and sometimes multiple clauses make up a sentence, okay? So verbless clauses or verbless sentences do not have no explicit verb. What they have instead is an implied copula, okay? And I don't know if copula is a new term for you or not, but the word copula just means a word that joins a subject to a predicate. And in English, not every language uses a copula, but in English, our copula is the verb to be, okay? So is, are, was, and were are our copula or our copular verb. Okay? So I've already referred to this as me, Tarzan, you, Jane, right? We talked about that. In Hebrew, you say, I, a man. That means I am a man. You, a woman. You are a woman. The boys in the garden. That means the boys are in the garden. And in Hebrew, the verb is and are is not present. It's not explicit. It's a verbless clause. But you have to add the verb to be in your translation, okay? So that's verbless. Verbal sentences or verbal clauses, these have an explicit verb. When your verb is explicit, and you've been seeing this in Hebrew, the typical word order that you're going to see is verb, subject, object, where, again, you're reading the VSO from left to right in English, right? Because these are English letters. But realize that when you're seeing the actual sentence in Hebrew, if the verb is first, it's going to be way over here, right? And then your subject, and then your object. So, I could have something like Moshe we want to do our verb first. Katal, Moshe, and then Sus. Okay, so let's redo our labeling here. So katal means to kill. To kill. Violent language, this Hebrew is. My verb is first. Moshe is my subject. Sus is my direct object. How would I translate this? Moses killed a horse. Okay, Moses killed a horse. So from right to left, verb came first, then subject, then object. So that is our most frequent word order when we have a verbal clause. All right. When we have a verbless clause, okay, a verbless clause, we have subject followed by what I am going to call the subject complement. Okay, so S is the subject. SC is a subject complement. Now, a subject complement is what you're saying about the subject. By the way, complement is spelled with an E right here, okay? If you put an I there, it means you really think someone's cute or nice. Pay you a compliment. Here, compliment with an E is a different word. It's a grammatical term. If I say something like, that's you. You are, and I don't put anything after the word are, you are waiting for something else to finish that sentence, aren't you? It is not complete. You're waiting for what's called the subject complement. A complement is something that fills out the sentence with stuff that you're expecting to be there. And so you're waiting for something like, you are handsome, right? You hear that all the time. You are a man, or maybe something like, you are at work. Think about this for just a minute. You, in all of these cases, is the subject, and what you are makes up the subject complement. Okay? What kind of words are the subject complement over here? I have handsome, that's an adjective, right? A word that can modify noun. A man, that's a noun. At work, that's a prepositional phrase. I'm using a preposition at and an object of the preposition. Any of those sorts of things could be the subject complement in a copular construction. A copular construction is one that's using a form of the verb to be with a subject and a subject complement. Okay? In Hebrew, so let me go back over here. In between the subject and the subject complement, I'm going to have an implied copula. It won't be explicit in Hebrew. Okay? And the most common way to see the word order in Hebrew is to see the subject first and then the subject complement second. So in our examples here from the book on page 72, notice that I have Hamelech. What does Hamelech mean? The king, good. And that's my subject. It's first. Hamelech is my subject. And then where the king is second. All, which is upon, and then ha-kiseh, on the throne. Okay? That's a prepositional phrase, right? Which is the subject complement. So the king on the throne means the king is on the throne. And this typical word order for this type of a construction is to put the subject first. In the verbal clauses, the subject usually comes after the verb. Not always, but frequently. Okay? The other example that's given here is mi tzaddik. Remember, mi is a question word. Means what? Who. And then I have this word tzaddik. Okay, so this is my subject. Tzaddik is my subject complement. The copular verb is implied, so I'm going to put that in parentheses to indicate that. But again, notice that the subject was first. Who is righteous? Question. Okay? Who is righteous? You have to supply the copula, the verb to be. And which tense will it be in? You won't know unless you have context. And since we're just doing individual words, we have no context. So individual sentences. So default to the present tense unless you have a reason to go with the past tense way of understanding it. So if the context were clearly past, then you would say something like, who was righteous? But we don't have any context here, so we don't know. All right. Back to our verbal clauses. If we had any other modifiers, so verb, subject, object, for example, if we had a prepositional phrase, the prepositional phrase is going to usually go somewhere after the subject. So I could have verb, subject, object, verb, subject, prepositional phrase. I could have verb, subject, object, prepositional phrase. Okay? The example from page 72, the last Hebrew example is the king walked in the garden. Halach hamelech bagan. Halach is my verb, hamelech is my subject, and bagan is my prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrases are usually adverbial. They modify the verb and they usually go after the verb. So that's certainly in the place that we would expect it. All right. So those are the types of sentences. They're not the only kinds and orders of sentences we're going to see in Hebrew as we go on, but these are the most frequently occurring ones, and this is the pattern that they typically follow. The last paragraph of chapter 7.2, that section on page 72, has to do with Ross's use of language like nominative, accusative, and so forth. And so I just want to make a comment about that. This term case. How many of you in this class have actually studied Greek before? Let me just see you raise your hand. All right, so several of you have. You know that Greek is a language that has a case system where the endings of words are modified to indicate what function the word has in the sentence. Hebrew does not have a case system. In ancient Hebrew, they had a case system, but the case system, for the most part, fell out of the language. So when we talk about case, or when grammarians talk about case in Hebrew, they're not talking about real case. They're talking about something called case function, okay? And this is an important concept. Case function, when we talk about case, just means how is a noun functioning in a sentence? If something has nominative function, the noun has nominative function. Oops. I just wrote the word nomination. I must be thinking of politics there. Nominative function means that the noun's function is typically as a subject. Okay? Subject. If a noun has accusative function, that means that its role is typically a direct object or some other adverbial notion that qualifies the verb. But the direct object is the most common way to qualify or limit the verb. It limits the verb's action to some object. He hit a ball. So he didn't just hit anything. The ball, as the direct object, tells me what was hit. Okay? So accusative nouns limit the verbal idea in some way. And then genitive function is another expression that's used. And the genitive function will typically indicate things like possession. So whose horse am I talking about? And also, let me just change that to object of a preposition. So when grammarians use these terms for nouns, they're really talking more about the function the noun has, not the form of the noun, because Hebrew doesn't have a case form. There's not a nominative case ending or an accusative case ending. Okay? So that's really all I want to say about that. Now, when we get to chapter 12, we'll talk a lot more about this notion of genitive case function. All right? Now, 7.3. Let's talk about 7.3 in Ross. This has to do with the article. I'm sorry, not the article, the conjunction. We have a conjunction in Hebrew, and we have conjunctions in English. A conjunction is a word that simply joins two things. Okay? If you've ever been driving and you came to a junction, you came to a place where two roads came together, right? And a conjunction is a word that's going to join nouns together, a boy and a girl. The conjunction and, which is actually going to be spelled typically v, a vav with a vocal shiva. That conjunction can join adjectives, a happy and exuberant boy, happy and exuberant. I would use the conjunction vav to do this. It could join whole clauses. I love chocolate and I love peanut butter. Okay? Typically, the conjunction vav in Hebrew will be translated as and. Okay? But it could also be translated as but, yet, as well. Okay? So I don't want you to assume that every time you come to the conjunction v, that you have to translate it as and. Alright? I'm going to talk about what are some situations in a moment, but when you might translate it as but. But the first thing we need to do is talk about how you write it. Okay? So, just the major points here. Number one is that the typical pointing for the vav conjunction is a consonant vav with a shiva under it prefixed to a word. Okay? So if I want to say something like a horse, sus. If I want to say and a horse, what am I going to do? I'm going to add the vav in front of the word sus. What kind of a shiva do I want to put here? What kind of shiva is that? That is vocal, right? Why is it vocal? Because it's a shiva at the beginning of the word. All right, so vocal shiva. So it'll be pronouncing the vav as a v, vasus. Vasus, say that with me, vasus. So that's and a horse. Okay, so here obviously we would want to translate that as and. All right. Let's take another set. Let's take ish, which means a man, and isha, which means a woman. Okay, but I want to add the conjunction and in between these. How will I do it? Again, take your vav, whatever it is you want to join to the next word. You put the v in front, and what kind of a shiva is that? That's a vocal shiva. Okay. That's pretty simple, isn't it? So, ish v isha means what? Yeah, man and wife, or a man and a woman. Okay? But again, you're going to translate that conjunction as the conjunction, as the word and. Okay. So, in this way, the conjunction vav is a lot like what? What have we seen that gets prefixed to words and has a vav for its vowel pointing? These are the inseparable prepositions. So here they are like the inseparable prepositions. And what are those inseparable prepositions? B, L, and K. Right? All of them get prefixed with the vocal shiva. Very, very much like your inseparable prepositions. They behave exactly that way. All right. What else do we see that makes them seem like the inseparable prepositions? Well, another way that they're like the inseparable prepositions is how they handle the vav in front of a word that has a compound shiva under it. So let's take the word adama. What does adama mean? Earth, right? Earth, land, dirt. If I want to say and land or earth or ground, what do? Well, I can add the vav. I would add a vocal shiva here. And now I've got a problem because I have a vocal shiva followed by a compound shiva, don't I? How is Hebrew going to resolve this little issue here? That's right. We have to resort to the Red Ryder solution, right? The Red Ryder solution is always to shoot out an I. But with a compound shava, he is more violent than your typical vocal shava, right? So he's going to shoot out both I's and replace them with the short vowel that matches the left half of the compound shava, and the compound shava will stay put. So it becomes va'adama. Okay, va'adama. When will we see situations like this? If I have a, what kind of consonant is that? That's a guttural. And if the guttural is supposed to have a vocal shava, it'll take a compound shava instead. And when I put the vav in front of it, I'll have a vav with a vocal shava followed by the guttural with its compound shava, and it's resolved in this way. Okay? So here, let's take another one. Let's take the word Edom, right? We've also seen this one. Edom is Edom with a compound shava, but with the segol element in it. If I want to say and Edom, it's going to be v Edom, vocal shava. Can I leave this sequence like this? No. We're going to take our Red Ryder BB gun, shoot out both I's, replace it with the corresponding short vowel that matches the left half of that compound shava, which will be what? A segol in this case. Excellent. So it would be ve'edom, ve'edom, and Edom. Okay? So again, this is behaving just like what? Just like the inseparable prepositions over here, right? All right. You also saw a situation where, remember we had the Hebrew love story where the Yod quiesced? We have Yehudah. What's that mean? Judah, right? Is that a vocal shava under the Yod? Yehudah? That is. If I want to say and Judah, I add my vav with its vocal shava. Are we going to be able to keep these two vocal shavas together? Nope. Hebrew will do what? Shoot out one I, right? Vocal shavas are not as violent as compound shavas. Shoot out an I. What will the vocal shava do? It becomes silent, right? He doesn't want anyone to know that he shot the kid with the eye, shot the kid in the eye. So it becomes silent. And here's where I have that situation where the Kirik and the Yod reunite in the Hebrew love story, right? They see each other from across the room. They say, we were once in love. Let's reunite and become our own thing. And so we get a quiescence of the Yod. It loses its consonantal value. And I'm left with a Kirik Yod, Vihuda, and Judah. This is not very common. It does happen from time to time. So I am not all that concerned that you pay special attention to this, okay? But it is pointed out as something that happens. Actually, I should, just to stay in sync with what Ross is doing, I should specify that the gutturals with compound shava is example A, and the Hebrew love story with the Yod quiescing is 2B in the Ross lecture.